Welcome all to the Nightman's Horror Theatre. Kick back, relax, and fall asleep to the tales from the Nightman's Book of Horrors. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Shadows on Coldwater Lane. The rain had been falling for hours, the kind of steady, cold drizzle that seeped into bones and blurred the world to greys and silvers. Coldwater Lane was quiet, the streetlights casting cones of pale light onto the slick asphalt. Maggie Rowan's cottage sat near the end of the lane, its porch light glowing warmly against the gloom. She had just finished her shift at the vet clinic and was pouring herself a glass of red wine when she heard the knock. It was soft at first, almost polite. Then it came again, harder. She hesitated. It was 8:47 p.m., and she wasn't expecting anyone. Through the rain-streaked window she could just make out the figure of a man standing on her porch, head bowed beneath the hood of a dark jacket. She opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" The man looked up. His face was pale, almost grey, his eyes a startling, glassy blue. "Phone's dead," he said. "Car broke down up the road. Could I use yours?" Maggie glanced past him toward the street. She couldn't see any car, but something in his voice, low, urgent, almost too calm, made her step back anyway. "Sure," she said, motioning toward the kitchen counter. He stepped inside, bringing with him the damp smell of wet leaves and cigarette smoke. And that was the last time anyone on Coldwater Lane saw Maggie Rowan alive. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the air crisp and bright. Detective Jonas Reeves stood in the doorway of Maggie Rowan's cottage, notebook in hand, eyes scanning the neat living room. A single glass of red wine sat half full on the coffee table. Her coat still hung on the rack by the door. The phone was off the hook. Neighbor said she saw her here last night. Reeve asked Officer Patel, who was standing by the bookshelf. "Yeah," said Maggie's car still in the driveway. No sign she left on foot either. Reeve crouched beside the phone. The line was dead, cleanly severed at the base. He felt the first flicker of unease. "Call CSU. We're treating this as suspicious." When the man's hands clamped around her wrists, she realized how stupid she'd been to let him in. The phone call had been a ruse, she saw that now. He didn't even glance at the landline before yanking the cord from the wall. She fought, nails catching on his jacket, but he was stronger, faster. Something sharp pressed against her ribs. "Walk," he ordered. The rain was still falling as he pushed her toward the road. A dark sedan waited just beyond the reach of the porch light. The back door opened, and another man stepped out, taller, leaner, his face shadowed by the brim of a cap. They shoved her inside. The door slammed, and the world outside vanished. By noon, Reeve had Maggie's background, 32, veterinary assistant, lived alone, no known enemies. Her last phone call had been to her sister in Maine at 8:02 p.m. He walked Coldwater Lane with Patel, knocking on doors. Most people had been home during the storm. Only one neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Calloway, had seen anything unusual, a dark sedan idling with its lights off just beyond Maggie's driveway, around 9 p.m. "Could you make out the driver?" Reeve asked. Mrs. Calloway shook her head. "Too dark. But I remember the license plate had a 7 in it. That's all I saw before it drove off. It wasn't much, but it was a start." The car ride blurred into a long, nauseating stretch of darkness and wet road. They didn't speak, except for occasional mutters between the two men. She caught fragments, "back way in, no one around this time of year." When the car finally stopped, they dragged her out. A dilapidated farmhouse loomed ahead, its windows boarded, roof sagging. The smell of rot and mildew hit her before they reached the door. Inside, the air was damp and cold. They pushed her into a room with bare walls, a stained mattress in the corner. A single light bulb swung overhead. "Stay quiet," the tall one said. His voice was deeper, steadier than the other man's. "It's easier that way." By Sunday afternoon, the search had expanded into nearby woods and back roads. Reeves' gut told him Maggie hadn't gone far. Abductors often kept victims close, at least at first. CSU found partial boot prints outside Maggie's porch. Size 11, heavy tread. In the mud beside them was a smaller, lighter print, a size 9. 2 abductors. The break came from traffic cam footage 2 miles from Coldwater Lane, a dark sedan with foggy headlights passing at 9:12 p.m. The plate was partially obscured, but Reeves' team enhanced it enough to pull a match registered to a man named Brett Fain. Fain had priors for assault, B&E, and suspected ties to an interstate smuggling crew. She didn't know how long she'd been in the room before the short one came back. Brett, she thought she heard the taller one call him. He brought a plate of cold beans and bread. She didn't touch it. He crouched, grinning in a way that made her skin crawl. "You'll eat eventually." They always do. When he left, she heard voices in the next room. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was tense. Something about the handoff and not ready yet. She didn't know what they planned to do with her, but she knew one thing: she couldn't wait around to find out. Reeve and his team raided Brett Fain's last known address on Monday morning. The house was empty, but they found fresh tire tracks in the mud, same pattern as the sedan in the footage. A neighbor mentioned Fain had been seen with another man in recent weeks, someone quiet but intense, driving an old pickup. That matched the description of Cal Mercer, a former farmhand with a history of violence. Mercer's last known address was an abandoned farmhouse 20 miles out. Exactly the kind of place no one would stumble upon by accident. Reeves' SUV crunched over gravel as they approached the Mercer property just before dawn. The air was brittle with cold, mist rising from the fields. Inside, the house smelled of damp and rot. Every step made the floorboards groan. Upstairs clear, Patel's voice came over the radio. Reeve pushed into the back hallway and froze at the sound of hurried footsteps ahead. A door slammed. Then came a woman's voice, ragged, desperate, "Help me." Reeve's boots pounded the warped floorboards as he followed the voice. He pushed through the last door at the end of the hallway and into a back room with peeling floral wallpaper. Maggie was there, barefoot, wrists chafed red, her eyes wide with terror. Behind her, Brett Fain lunged forward, a knife flashing in the dim light. Reeve didn't think. He threw his shoulder into Brett, sending the blade skittering across the floor. "Maggie," he barked. "Out, now!" She stumbled past him, nearly collapsing into Patel's arms in the hallway. Brett roared, twisting under Reeve's grip. They slammed into the wall, knocking chunks of plaster loose. Brett got one hand around Reeve's throat before Patel burst back in, baton cracking against Brett's forearm. The man went down, cursing. They cuffed him, but Reeve's gut told him it wasn't over. Back at the SUV, Maggie was wrapped in a thermal blanket, shaking uncontrollably. Reeve crouched in front of her. "2 men," she whispered. "Where's the other one?" "Cal Mercer." Reeve's radio crackled. The search team had found fresh tire tracks behind the house. A second vehicle had left within the last hour. Mercer was gone. At the precinct, Maggie gave her statement in halting bursts. She described Mercer as colder than Brett, more controlled, more dangerous. She'd overheard them talking about a handoff and not ready yet. It sounded like she'd been intended for something beyond a simple ransom. Human trafficking crossed Reeves' mind, though he kept that to himself. When they asked if she'd seen where they'd driven her from the cottage, she closed her eyes, recalling every bump and turn. Gravel, then a left after a long straight road. I smelled something, like manure. That narrowed it. There were 3 active farms in that area. Mercer's pickup was spotted on a traffic cam heading north on Route 17 at 6:12 a.m. The road eventually fed into the interstate, and from there to anywhere. Reeve pushed hard, calling in favors with state police. By evening, they had a hit. Mercer had been seen fueling up at a station 2 towns over. The attendant remembered him clearly. Quiet guy. Paid cash. Seemed in a hurry. In the bed of the truck had been a large, top-covered shape. Reeve didn't like the image that planted in his mind. That night in protective custody, Maggie couldn't sleep. Every sound became Mercer's footsteps. Every shadow on the motel wall seemed to hold his shape. In her dreams, she was back in the farmhouse, only this time, the room had no door, no windows. Just that swinging light bulb, swaying closer and closer to her face until it burst, raining glass. She woke gasping, clutching the blanket like armor. 2 days later, a hunter stumbled across a shack deep in the woods, 40 miles from the farmhouse. Inside, police found rope, duct tape, and several women's IDs, none belonging to Maggie. The IDs were from missing persons cases stretching back nearly 6 years. Reeve felt the cold settle in his bones. This wasn't just a one-time grab. Mercer had been doing this a long time. On Friday, they got a break. Mercer's truck was found abandoned near a rail yard. Security footage showed him boarding a freight train heading south. But he'd made a mistake. He left behind a duffel bag containing cash, clothes, and, most chillingly, Polaroids of women, some clearly terrified, others unconscious. One of them was Maggie, taken in the farmhouse. Reeve brought her the photo. "This is the last thing he had of you," he said. "It means you got away from him. That's a win." She didn't feel like she'd won anything. By the weekend, the case was national news. Headlines screamed about the Coldwater Lane kidnapping and the farmhouse of fear. Reeve hated the circus. Every newscaster speculated wildly about Mercer's whereabouts. Tips poured in from every state, most useless. Through it all, Maggie stayed hidden under protective detail. She barely spoke, except to ask one question over and over, "You're sure he can't find me?" Reeve always said yes. He wasn't sure it was true. 3 weeks later, Mercer was reportedly spotted in a diner in rural Georgia. By the time deputies arrived, he was gone. Another sighting in Louisiana put him with a different truck, darker hair, a limp. Reeve knew the pattern. Mercer would change appearances, work odd jobs for cash, stay invisible until the heat cooled. But this time, his face was burned into every patrol officer's mind. Sooner or later, he'd slip. It came from an unexpected place, a pawn shop owner in Baton Rouge. Mercer had tried to sell a vintage watch, engraved with initials matching one of the other missing women's names from the shack. The owner had recognized him from the news and quietly hit the alarm button. Mercer bolted, but police caught him 2 blocks away. In his possession, a folded piece of paper with Maggie's home address. When they brought him back to stand trial, Reeve visited him in holding. Mercer sat with that unnerving stillness, eyes like frozen ponds. "Why her?" Reeve asked. Mercer tilted his head. "Why anyone?" "You're going away for the rest of your life," Reeve said. Mercer smiled faintly. "Life's longer than you think." The trial lasted 6 weeks. Brett Fane took a plea deal, testifying against Mercer in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony painted a grim picture. Mercer had been abducting women for years, selling some into trafficking rings, killing others when they became too much trouble. Maggie testified on the third week. She held her ground, her voice steady, even when Mercer's eyes never left her. The jury took less than a day to convict him on multiple counts of kidnapping, assault, and murder. He was sentenced to life without parole. Maggie moved away from Coldwater Lane, changing her name and starting over in a small coastal town. She adopted a rescue dog, a shepherd mix, and started painting again. But some nights, when the wind rattled the windows, she'd wake certain that Mercer was still out there. That somewhere, beyond the edges of the quiet street, he was watching. Reeve still called every few months. His voice was always the same, calm, grounding. "You're safe," he'd say. She wanted to believe him. On a rainy night in March, a guard making rounds at the state penitentiary found a folded slip of paper in Mercer's cell. It contained only 2 words, written in neat, deliberate letters. Coldwater Lane. Vanished on River Road. The last night anyone saw Haley Madsen was cool and damp, with a mist hanging low over the road. Street lamps glowed weakly through the fog, each halo of light broken by drifting moths. Inside Riverside Diner, the air was thick with the smell of fried onions and coffee that had been on the warmer too long. Haley had just finished her shift, slipping her apron into her tote bag. She'd worked there for 3 months, saving for a used car so she wouldn't have to walk the 2 miles home after dark. "Text me when you get home," called her co-worker, Morgan, as Haley pushed open the heavy glass door. "Yeah," Haley said over her shoulder, the word almost swallowed by the chime of the door and the hiss of the grill. The diner sat at the edge of town, where River Road curved away from the main street and thinned into farmland. On one side were acres of soybeans, their stalks black silhouettes against the mist. On the other was a stretch of woods that pressed close to the road, their leaves rattling softly in the breeze. Haley walked fast, head down, earbuds in. Music filled her ears. She'd later be remembered for listening to a playlist called Summer Forever. She passed the intersection at Miller's Bridge just after 7:40 p.m. A man sitting on his porch 2 houses down would later tell police he saw a dark blue pickup roll slowly through the stop sign, headlights off. He didn't think much of it at the time. The next known event came 12 minutes later, when a driver heading the opposite direction noticed something on the shoulder, a cell phone, screen cracked, lying face down. The driver picked it up, intending to turn it in at the diner, but when he saw the wallpaper, a selfie of a smiling teenage girl, and the missed calls piling up, he decided to call 911. By the time officers Leland and Harris arrived, the phone was in an evidence bag. They swept the roadside with flashlights, beams cutting through fog, finding only one more clue, a scuffed white sneaker half buried in the mud near the ditch. No one saw Haley Madsen again that night. By 9 p.m., the Madsen family living room was crowded with uniforms. Haley's mother, Darlene, sat rigid on the couch, her fingers twisting a balled-up tissue. "She texted me she was leaving work at 7:35, she said for the 3rd time. "She always lets me know." Detective Sergeant Clay Henson took notes in his worn leather pad. He'd been on the force for 22 years and had worked enough missing person cases to know that the first day was a dangerous clock. Every hour without contact narrowed the odds. Haley's stepfather, Rick, paced behind the couch. "We're wasting time. You should be out there, checking every." "We are," Henson cut in gently. "Patrols are sweeping River Road right now." A uniformed officer approached with the cracked phone. "Call history's full of texts with someone labeled just a E," he said. "Friend?" Henson asked Darlene. She shook her head. No. She didn't have any friend with a name like that. Henson's gut tightened. Unknown contacts this early were bad signs. By 10 p.m., deputies were knocking on doors along River Road. At 10:45, a young couple in a rental house admitted they'd heard a scream or maybe a shout around 7:45, followed by the sound of an engine revving hard. By midnight, the search parties began. The beam of a deputy's flashlight cut across a muddy patch near the old boat ramp, landing on a small, wet sneaker. The same brand Haley wore to school. It wasn't until 2:13 a.m. that the word abduction was first written in the incident report. Morning brought helicopters. The rhythmic chop of rotor blades drifted over cornfields as camera crews set up near the diner. Reporters shoved microphones at anyone willing to talk. Rumors began almost instantly that Haley had been meeting an older man, that she'd been in trouble with drugs, that she'd been planning to run away. Dolleen stood on her front porch at 11 a.m., telling the local station, "My daughter is a good girl. She's in trouble, and she needs help. Please bring her home." Her voice cracked at the end, and the clip played on repeat across every channel that night. The sheriff's department brought in K-9 units. Dogs tracked Haley sent from the diner parking lot, along River Road, and into the ditch where the sneaker was found. From there, the trail simply stopped. Detectives canvassed local businesses for camera footage. The grainy black and white feed from Greg's Gas and Go proved the first real lead, a dark blue pickup truck making 3 slow passes past Miller's Bridge between 7:30 and 7:45 p.m. The problem, the footage was too blurry to make out the driver. By day 3, 3 names sat at the top of the board in the incident room. Landon Price, Haley's ex-boyfriend. 18. History of fights at school, especially over jealousy. Claimed he was at home gaming the night she vanished. No one could verify. Terry Sullivan, a delivery driver for a regional grocery chain. GPS logs placed his truck on River Road at 7:42 p.m. He claimed he was rerouted by his dispatch software due to a traffic backup. Earl Benton, 47. Local handyman. Arrested for kidnapping in Oklahoma in 2004, served 7 years before moving to town. Said he didn't know the girl and was working a roofing job the day she disappeared. Each man was brought in separately. Price got defensive fast, pounding the table. "She broke up with me, okay? That's it. I didn't touch her." Sullivan was overly polite, smiling too much, giving long, irrelevant answers. Benton barely spoke at all, staring at the tabletop like he could burn through it. On the 5th day, the sheriff called a press conference. The blue pickup was officially identified as a 2008 to 2011 Ford F-150 extended cab. Partial plate K7-9. The public tip line lit up. One caller, a woman who ran a bait shop near the county line, swore she'd seen Benton driving a dark blue Ford that week. Benton denied owning a truck. A quick warrant on his property found no such vehicle, but they did find tire tracks in the dirt matching the F-150's tread pattern. Henson had seen enough to move. Benton sat in the interview room, hands cuffed, staring at the wall. "You know, Earl," Henson began, setting down a folder, "when I worked homicide in Tallahassee, I had this case. Guy swore up and down he'd never been near the victim. You know what caught him?" Benton said nothing. "Cell tower pings. Funny thing, Earl, your phone lit up a tower a quarter-mile from River Road at 7:46 p.m. That's just after Haley disappeared." Still nothing. Henson slid a photo across the table, Haley's shoe in the mud. "We found this near the old boat ramp. There were tire tracks there, too. Tracks that match the Ford Duke don't own. A flicker. Barely there crossed Benton's face. 2 hours later, he admitted giving someone a ride, but refused to name who. Not my problem what they did after, he muttered. Detectives pulled Benton's phone records. There it was, multiple short calls to a prepaid number the week before the kidnapping. The number traced to a burner phone bought at Quickmart #14, 3 blocks from Benton's roofing job. The clerk remembered the buyer, tall, stocky, bald cap pulled low. Couldn't see his face clearly on the store's camera, but his truck. Blue Ford F-150. A tip came in from a hunter who'd noticed strange activity at an old cabin deep in the woods. SWAT hit it just after midnight. Inside, rope, duct tape, a hairbrush with long blonde strands, a blanket that smelled faintly of the diner's fry oil. But no Haley. On the table was a scrap of lined paper, too late. You'll never find her. 3 days later, a tip line call came from a farm supply driver. He'd seen a man matching Benton's description at an abandoned dairy farm 15 miles away. Deputies moved in fast. They found Haley tied but alive inside an old grain silo, her face pale, lips chapped. She whispered one word before breaking down in sobs, too. Benton was arrested on a county road less than an hour later. No one else was in the truck. At trial, Benton claimed he'd been forced to take Haley by a second man who threatened him. He refused to give a name. The jury didn't buy it, guilty on all counts. Haley returned home but refused interviews. The media eventually moved on, but in town, the rumors stayed. Some swore they saw another man in the pickup that night. Others said Benton's story about an accomplice was just a last-ditch lie. Detective Henson kept the burner phone in his desk drawer for years after, unable to shake the feeling that somewhere out there, the second set of hands was still free. And watching. The Night on Ashwood Lane by Seymour Coote. The rain had already turned to sleet by the time Cara Ellison stepped out of the Harbour Street bookshop. She paused under the awning, pulling her scarf higher over her mouth, watching the icy pellets bounce and shatter on the sidewalk. The neon open sign above her flickered before finally going dark with a pop as her manager flipped the switch inside. It was just after 9 on a Tuesday, the kind of night when the streets felt hollow. Across the road, the reflection of a single passing car warped in the wet pavement, red taillights bleeding into the gutter. Cara shifted her tote bag higher on her shoulder and unlocked her hatchback. Her phone buzzed, a text from her sister, Jenny. "Soup's on. Don't take Ashwood if it's icy." Cara typed back quickly. "Already on my way. Save me some bread." That would be the last text Jenny Ellison ever received from her. The drive from Harbour Street to Jenny's house was 15 minutes if the weather behaved. But Cara liked to take Ashwood Lane. A narrow 2-mile stretch cutting through the edge of town, lined with bare maple trees and the occasional leaning fence. She said it felt peaceful, even though most people avoided it at night. At 9:26 p.m., traffic cameras picked her up passing the intersection at Brimley Road, turning left toward Ashwood. At 9:31, a passing driver noticed a small blue hatchback pulled halfway onto the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. By the time the same spot was passed again at 9:47, the hazards were still on, but the driver's side door hung ajar. When Officer Drew McKinley arrived at 9:53, Cara was gone. Officer McKinley stepped out of his cruiser into the wet cold. The rain had slowed, but sleet still hissed in the roadside ditch. His flashlight beam cut across the blue hatchback, its hazard lights blinking in a slow, unnatural rhythm. Cara Ellison, he read off the registration. The driver's door was wide open, the seat pushed back as if someone taller had been driving. Her purse sat in the passenger seat, zipper open, wallet still inside. The phone was wedged between the seat and center console, its screen dead. He scanned the ground. Tire tracks curved slightly toward the ditch, then stopped. Beside them, one clear print in the mud, a man's work boot, size 11 or 12. He radioed it in, voice low. Possible abduction. Get Detective Hale out here. Marcus Hale had been in homicide for 9 years, but cases like this still worked under his skin. Disappearances were different. They were breathing puzzles, the clock ticking louder with every passing hour. He arrived at 10:14 p.m., coffee still steaming in his thermos. Partner Julia Kent was already there, snapping photos of the scene. "What's our window?" Hale asked. Last seen on camera at Brimley at 9:26. First caller reported the car at 9:31. That's a 5-minute gap. Hale crouched by the boot print. Boots deep. Whoever wore it's heavy, 200 pounds or carrying weight. Kent pointed to the faint drag marks near the rear bumper. Could be from someone's shoes. Or a struggle. No blood, no broken glass, no sign of a crash. Just absence, the kind that felt deliberate. Jenny Ellison's living room was bright and warm, but her hands twisted at the hem of her sweater. She's never late. And she wouldn't leave her phone. Hale asked about enemies, arguments, old boyfriends. Jenny shook her head until she hesitated. Last week, she said some guy outside her apartment was bothering her. She thought he was waiting for someone else, but... Hale pressed. She said he stared at her the whole time she was getting her mail. Made her feel watched. The boot print came back matched to a cheap brand sold locally. The only recent criminal with that size and style on record was Owen Cray, 34, 2 assault charges, one for harassing a waitress outside a bar. Hale and Kent found him at a rented trailer on the edge of town. "You own a pair of black Ridgeway work boots?" Hale asked. "Had some. Lost them." "Months ago," Cray replied, leaning in the doorway. "Where were you last night?" "At home." "Anyone with you?" "Nope." Kent glanced at Hale. It was the kind of answer that meant nothing and everything at once. Her head throbbed. The air was damp, the smell of mildew thick in her throat. She tried to move, but rope bit into her wrists. Somewhere above her, footsteps crossed a wooden floor. A door creaked. A man's voice, "You're awake." She recognized it, not from a friend, not from work, but from somewhere close. Security footage from a gas station near Ashwood Lane showed Kara's car, and behind it, a dark sedan. Owner, Dylan Reese. Record, petty theft, bar fights. Claimed he was just going home and never saw Kara. His alibi checked out, time-stamped purchase at a convenience store across town 10 minutes later. Hale didn't like coincidences, but without cause, they had to let him go. Chapter 8. The Barn. A search of Owen Cray's cousin's property turned up a locked barn. Inside, rope, duct tape, women's jewelry in a small tin. And blood on the concrete. It wasn't Kara's. A traffic cam showed Dylan Reese's truck in the area of Ashwood Lane just after Kara's car vanished. Paint flecks from that same truck matched traces on Kara's coat. With a warrant, they searched Dylan's place. Under his bed, a set of Ridgeway boots, size 11, caked in fresh mud. A bartender came forward. Dylan had been in 2 nights ago with a young woman who looked scared. The lead brought them to a foreclosed farmhouse on County Road 6. Hale and Kent went in first. Kara was there, pale, shaking, but alive. She whispered it wasn't just them. Dylan Reese, guilty on all counts, 25 to life. Owen Cray, insufficient evidence, walked free. Kara left town within weeks, moving under a new name. Hale kept her statement in his desk drawer, the last line underlined. I think the third man is still out there. The Ashford abduction. The night Eleanor Price disappeared, Ashford was drowning in rain. It wasn't the pleasant kind, no soft patter on rooftops, no misty romance about it, just cold, needling drops that made you hunch your shoulders and keep your head down. The streets were slick, the old street lamps casting watery halos on the asphalt. At the corner of Main and Quarry, the small town quiet was broken only by the hum of passing cars heading toward the interstate. Eleanor left her cafe at 6:54 p.m., flipping the sign from open to closed. She was wearing a navy raincoat, jeans, and those old Converse sneakers she refused to throw away. The smell of coffee clung to her even out in the drizzle. She locked the door, stuffed the keys in her coat pocket, and texted her sister, leaving now. See you soon. 5 minutes. That's all it should have taken to reach Caroline's house. On the outskirts of town, Old Quarry Road wound through a strip of pines. The rain pooled in the ruts, and the only light came from the occasional passing car. Eleanor's Civic was halfway through the stretch when a pair of headlights appeared in her rearview mirror, closing in faster than she liked. She eased to the side to let the vehicle pass. But instead of going around, the car pulled up behind her and flashed its high beams. She frowned, shifted into park. A man stepped out of the other car, a dark sedan, maybe a Ford, and walked toward her, hands in the pockets of a black jacket. He was broad-shouldered, taller than average, the brim of a cap shadowing his face. Eleanor cracked her window an inch. Everything okay? The man smiled in a way that wasn't reassuring. You got a problem with your taillight. Thought you should know. She glanced in the mirror, both taillights were glowing red in the wet road. They're fine. That's so. He stepped closer. Mind if I take a look? Something in his tone made her pulse thump. She reached for the window controls, but the man's hand shot inside before she could close it. The rain hissed in the ditch. Her door yanked open. A cold, damp hand clamped around her wrist. Detective Aaron Whitford was at home, peeling the label off a beer bottle, when his phone buzzed. A vehicle found on Old Quarry Road. Driver missing. Purse, phone, and keys left inside. By the time he reached the scene, blue strobes lit the tree line, and the road smelled faintly of wet pine and exhaust. Officer Garrison briefed him, white Honda Civic, Eleanor Price, 27. Whitford ducked under the tape and stepped to the driver's side. Rain spattered the seat. The handbag was still zipped halfway open, the contents neat, wallet, receipts, a pack of gum. On the road shoulder, faint prints in the mud. One set small, the other large, heavier. The heavier ones overlapped the smaller. He had seen that pattern before, or it never meant anything good. Caroline Price was still in her apron when she opened the door. She's never late, she said, voice trembling. She texted me 5 minutes before she was supposed to be here. And now she broke off, covering her mouth. Whitford kept his tone even. Has anyone been bothering her lately? Caroline hesitated. Last week, she mentioned a guy outside the cafe. Just standing there, watching her through the window. She thought maybe he was waiting for someone else, but she didn't like the way he looked at her. Back at the station, grainy dashcam footage from a delivery van showed a man leaning into Eleanor's open door. The video lacked clarity, but Whitford saw the posture, forward, dominant, no trace of casual conversation. No match in the facial recognition database. Eleanor woke to darkness and the musty smell of wood rot. Her wrists burned, rope cut into her skin. Somewhere above, boards creaked under footsteps. "You're awake," a voice said. She knew that voice. Not as a friend. Not even as an acquaintance. Just from somewhere too close. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. The man didn't answer. The first suspect was Owen Cray. 34. 2 assault charges, 1 restraining order. Owned a black sedan. Claimed he'd been watching TV all evening. His boots, Ridgeway brand, size 12, sat drying by the door, mud caked on the soles. Whitford bagged them for evidence. Forensics came back, the mud matched Old Quarry Road. Days passed. The search radius widened. Drones, dogs, volunteers combed fields and ditches. No sign of Eleanor. Then a tip: a bartender swore she'd seen Cray 2 nights earlier with a young woman who looked scared. She remembered because the woman's raincoat was soaked, and the man kept a hand on her shoulder the whole time. Whitford found the barn on a foreclosed property outside town. Inside, rope, duct tape, and a small tin of women's jewelry. And on the floor, a smear of blood, not Eleanor's. In the far corner, hidden under a top, was a trap door. He called it in before opening it. Eleanor blinked against the sudden light as the trap door swung back. Whitford's face appeared above, framed in rain and flashlight glare. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now." She didn't believe him. Not entirely. Not yet. Because there had been 2 men. And the other one was still out there. Whitford's boots hit the warped wood of the barn floor as he crouched over the trapdoor. Eleanor's face was pale, damp hair sticking to her cheeks. The light from his flashlight caught the ropes around her wrists, frayed and half unraveled. He'd been in homicide for 15 years, but this moment, seeing the victim alive, never got old. "We're getting you out," he said, keeping his voice calm. Above them, the wind rattled the tin roof. Rain came in sideways through gaps in the boards. Whitford called for EMTs, but Eleanor flinched when his radio crackled. "It's okay," he said again, and meant it. But she didn't look convinced. Her eyes darted toward the far shadows of the cellar. "There was another one," she said. Eleanor, 4 days earlier. The first thing she noticed after he forced her into the car was the smell: stale cigarettes, wet wool, and something sharp, chemical. She kept her eyes on the door handle, testing its give. It didn't open. The lock was manual, and there was no knob. He must have removed it. The man didn't speak until they were off the main road. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. She didn't answer. The rain made the road shine like black glass. When they reached the barn, he pulled her out by the wrist, yanking hard enough that her shoulder ached. Inside, the air was cold and damp. He pushed her toward the trapdoor, down into the dark, and the world narrowed to the smell of dirt and wood and rope. Hours passed, maybe days. Broken only by the sound of footsteps above her and the occasional creak of the door when he brought food. A second set of footsteps appeared on the second night. Lighter. Faster. She never saw the other man's face. Whitford, present. They airlifted Eleanor to St. Vincent's, where she was treated for dehydration, rope burns, and bruising on her arms. She was lucky, and Whitford didn't use the word lightly. Owen Cray was booked within hours. The boots matched the tracks. The barn was his uncle's property. But Cray wasn't talking, and the mention of another man made the case more complicated than Whitford wanted to admit. The DA wanted to push for trial quickly. The media was already running the local hero detective saved Ashford woman angle, but Whitford knew better than to close the file too soon. That second set of prints in the mud outside the Civic still bothered him. Eleanor, the hospital. They told her she was safe. That Cray couldn't touch her now. But every time she closed her eyes, she heard the second man's voice, low, a murmur she couldn't make out, followed by the sound of something metal dragging across the floor above her. When the detectives came, she told them everything. How Cray had been the one to grab her, but not the one to bring her meals. How sometimes, when she woke in the dark, there had been the sound of someone breathing just on the other side of the cellar wall. Whitford wrote it all down. His pen scratched steadily against the paper. But when she mentioned the other man's laugh, short, sharp, like a bark, she saw him pause. Whitford, follow up. The laugh matched a name in his memory, Mason Holt. Small-time enforcer, tied to a couple of unsolved assaults in neighboring counties. No solid convictions. Holt and Cray had done time together for burglary 6 years earlier. Whitford drove out to Holt's last known address, a 2-story house at the edge of town with peeling paint and a rusted satellite dish hanging by one bolt. The mailbox was stuffed with damp flyers. No answer at the door. No sign of life except a faint smell of tobacco wafting from the cracked open back window. He had CSU come out and dust for prints. They found a partial match to Holt on the kitchen counter, and a small spiral notebook with times and dates written in block letters. One date stood out, March 8, 7 p.m. The night Eleanor vanished. The Last Stop Diner. Lorna Walsh worked the Wednesday night shift at the Last Stop Diner the way some people play a poker hand, steady face, no tells. It wasn't that she didn't like the place. She did. The smell of coffee and grilled onions had a comfort to it. The regulars tipped well, and the neon sign buzzing against the dark New Hampshire pines gave it a kind of roadside charm. But Wednesdays were always strange. The truckers were quieter, the locals more watchful. And somewhere between 11:30 and midnight, the parking lot always emptied until it was just her, the fry cook, and the long stretch of Highway 41 humming with the occasional semi. That night, March 14, 2018, it was raining hard enough to smear the world outside into streaks. Lorna had just poured herself a cup of coffee when the bell over the door jingled. The man who stepped in looked like he'd been walking a long time. Jacket soaked, baseball cap pulled low, boots leaving dark prints across the linoleum. He didn't shake off the rain, just slid into a booth in the back corner. She set the coffee pot down and grabbed a menu. Evening. Rough out there. He looked up briefly. His eyes were pale, almost colorless, and fixed on her with the kind of focus that made her skin prickle. Coffee. Black. No smile. No thank you. Just that. She poured him a mug and set it down. Kitchen still open if you want something hot. He didn't answer right away, just stirred his coffee slowly, though she hadn't given him sugar. Then, without looking up, he said, "You're here alone." Her grip on the coffee pot tightened. Fry cook's in the back. That seemed to satisfy him, or at least make him change the subject. Pancakes. 3 stack. She jotted the order and moved back to the counter, where Rick, the fry cook, was flipping burgers for a takeout order. She leaned in. Guy in the corner's giving me the creeps. Keep an eye out. Rick followed her glance, then shrugged. Highway drifters. Harmless most of the time. But when she turned back, the man was already watching her again. The timeline after that would later be pieced together from witness statements, receipts, and the grainy corner camera by the register. At 11:48 p.m., Lorna dropped off his pancakes. At 11:51, she refilled his coffee. At 12:06 a.m., the bell over the door jingled again, and 2 state troopers stopped in for pie. They sat at the counter, chatting with Rick, and the man in the corner never looked their way. At 12:29 a.m., the troopers left. At 12:31, so did the man in the cap. It was the last confirmed time anyone saw Lorna Walsh alive. When the morning shift arrived at 6 a.m., the diner's front door was locked. That wasn't unusual. Lorna was meticulous about procedure. But when Carla, the day waitress, let herself in, she found the back door standing ajar, rain pool just inside. The counter was wiped, register balanced, chairs stacked, except for one booth in the back corner, where a half-eaten stack of pancakes sat on a plate gone hard overnight. Carla called Rick, who swore he'd left around 1 a.m. and seen Lorna still inside, cleaning. By 7 a.m., when Lorna hadn't answered her phone, Carla called the police. Detective Avery Holt had been on the job long enough to know that rural disappearances could be slippery things. Sometimes the missing person showed up hungover 2 counties over, sometimes they didn't show up at all. By 9:15 a.m., he was standing in the rain outside the Last Stop diner, scanning the muddy parking lot. The security camera inside showed Lorna serving a man in a dark cap. No clear face, the bill shadowed most of it. The timestamp on his departure was 12:31 a.m. After that, no one entered or left until Carla at 6 a.m. Any vehicle? Holt asked the responding officer. Camera outside's been busted for months. Owner says they've been meaning to fix it. Holt swore under his breath. They put out a bolo, be on the lookout, for a white male, late 30s to early 40s, wearing a navy baseball cap and green army jacket. Tips trickled in. Someone thought they'd seen him walking along Route 12 at dawn. Someone else claimed he matched a guy who'd been panhandling outside a gas station 2 days earlier. None of it led anywhere concrete. Then, on Friday afternoon, Holt got a call from a motel clerk in Little Ford, 40 miles south. Got a guy here, fits your flyer. Paid cash for a room. Doesn't have a car. By the time Holt arrived, the room was empty. Bed unmade, damp towel on the floor, TV still buzzing faintly. In the trash was a diner receipt from March 14th, the Last Stop diner. She woke to the sound of rain on metal. Not the flat drumming of the diner roof, something closer, more enclosed. The air smelled of rust and oil. Her wrists ached from the plastic ties cutting into her skin. She was in a van. The windows were covered from the inside with something dark, maybe tarps. The only light came from the thin sliver between the front seats. She could make out the driver's shape, broad-shouldered, cap still on. He didn't look back. Lorna tried to shift her position, but the ties cut deeper. Her feet were bound too, ankles pressed together so tight she could feel the plastic digging through skin. The van hit a bump and she slammed sideways into the wall. Pain bloomed across her shoulder. "Where are we going?" she croaked, her throat dry. No answer. Just the hum of tires and the wipers dragging against glass. She thought of the troopers who had been there earlier that night, so close. If she had said something, if she had given them a look. But she hadn't wanted to cause a scene. The van slowed, then turned onto gravel. The smell hit her first, hay, mildew, and something. He dragged her out without speaking, boots sinking into wet dirt. She caught glimpses between raindrops, an old barn, leaning into itself, fields stretching out into darkness, no lights anywhere. Inside, the air was colder. Dust floated in the beam of his flashlight. He set her down on an old mattress in the corner and cut the ties on her ankles. The ones on her wrists stayed. From his jacket, he pulled a thermos and poured water into the cap. "Drink," he said. She hesitated. His eyes narrowed. "You'll need it." By Saturday, Holt had the man's name, or at least the one he'd been using, Dean Mercer. Born 1977, 3 prior arrests for assault, all in different states. No known address. The receipt from the diner had a time stamp, 11:48 p.m. He'd paid cash. The problem was the gap. No one could say where he'd gone between leaving the diner at 12:31 and the motel clerk spotting him almost a full day later. Then came the call from a farmer on Old Miller Road. "Saw a van last night. Parked by the old Jameson barn. Lights inside, for a while." Holt knew the place, abandoned 20 years, roof half collapsed. Lorna didn't sleep. Every creak in the barn sounded like footsteps. Dean Mercer sat on an overturned crate, knife in hand, whittling at a stick. The rasp of blade on wood was steady, methodical. "Why me?" she asked finally. He looked up, pale eyes flat. Wrong place, wrong time. Her mind raced. That meant there was no plan, no ransom, no reason to keep her alive except his own choice. That could change. Holt drove out to Old Miller Road with 2 deputies. Rain had turned the dirt track into mud, and branches clawed at the sides of the cruiser. Half a mile in, they killed the headlights. The barn came into view as a darker shadow against the trees. No movement. "Take it slow," Holt said. They moved in on foot, boots sinking, breath fogging in the cold air. Inside, the barn was silent. A mattress in the corner. Empty thermos. Plastic ties on the floor. They were too late. The next week blurred into stakeouts and dead ends. Mercer's van was spotted twice, once heading north on Route 6, once near the Vermont border, but by the time units arrived, it was gone. Holt pulled Lorna's file every night, staring at her photo. He hated the thought of her out there, scared and alone, waiting for someone who was always 2 steps behind. He doubled the roadblocks. Checked every abandoned property in a 50-mile radius. But Mercer knew these back roads. He was a ghost. On the 10th day, Lorna woke in a new place, a cabin this time, the air thick with wood smoke. Her wrists were raw from the ties. Mercer was calmer here, moving with purpose. He cooked. He shaved. He didn't speak much, but when he did, it was as if they were old acquaintances. "You'll see," he told her one night. "Out here, you can breathe." She thought about running every time he stepped outside, but the door was padlocked from the outside, the windows nailed shut. It was a gas station clerk in Ashby who finally broke the case. He called in a van matching Mercer's, army green, rust on the passenger door, parked out by the pumps. The driver had paid cash for cigarettes and left heading north. Holt got the call at 2:12 p.m. He was there by 3 o'clock. From there, they tracked the van to a dirt road leading into the White Pines Reserve. At the end, their cabin. The door gave after the second hit. Mercer wasn't inside. Lorna was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to her chest, eyes wide against the sudden light. She flinched when Holt crouched in front of her. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now." Her lips moved, but no sound came. Mercer was caught 3 days later in a hunting shack 20 miles from the cabin. At trial, he offered no defense, no explanation. He just watched Lorna from across the courtroom, as if memorizing her. She moved away after the verdict. Changed her name. Holt never saw her again, but sometimes, driving the back roads at night, he'd pass the Last Stop diner and think about that night in March, how a stranger in the rain had stepped inside, and nothing had been the same since.